So I gotta be honest. I gotta be a little vulnerable here. For a long portion of my life, I was what we colloquially consider a big ol' scaredy cat. Occasionally in high school, we would go to a friend's house, have a screening of a scary movie where all of the girlfriends would canoodle their boyfriends and nestle their eyes into their burly, brave chests so that they could feel safe. And maybe you'd look over and two of them would be making out or whatever. And if you happen to be my high school girlfriend watching this video, you know that the roles were reversed in our case. I think that I saw Nightmare on Elm Street on cable one night when I was a kid, and it scarred me to no end. It's safe to say that I became horror film phobic, and seeing a horror film in a theater, forget about it. It wasn't until the last 8 years or so that I started facing my fears and checking out a lot of horror movies, as I kept hearing incredible things from people whose opinions I respect greatly. Some notable examples might include It Comes at Night, Hereditary, Suspiria, It Chapter 2, It Follows, or Barbarian, the predecessor to the film I'm talking about today, Weapons, written and directed by Zach Cregger. And as I'm naming all of those other films, you might notice a trend in that these films deviate from a specific corner of the horror showcase, and that a lot of them, barring maybe the It movies, are what we might now consider elevated horror. There's a certain tradition in cinema to be advancing the form, advancing the genre, pushing the medium into new territory. It's rarely a forceful push. Film movements are rarely planned out or sparked by just one film, but a pretty gradual one instead. Elevated horror prides itself on tonality above cheap thrills. One might come away from an elevated horror film thinking, well, I didn't jump out of my seat necessarily, but damned if I didn't feel uneasy for the last 2 hours. And there's been a lot of discussion on elevated horror, nauseatingly so I'm not going to belabor the point too much. All I'll say is that when new voices in any genre, but in particular horror, come around, it's something worth paying attention to see if they have the juice. And man, I think Zach Cregger might just have the juice. So the story goes like this. During the early hours of a Wednesday morning in the town of Maybrook, Pennsylvania, 17 children from teacher Justine Gandy's class woke up at 2:17 in the morning and left their homes, running into the dark with their arms outstretched, and they are never seen again. The whole community is shocked and saddened by the children's disappearance, blaming Justine and pinning her as the suspect, despite Justine's protesting her innocence. The film follows the weeks after the disappearance of the children as Justine disobeys the authorities' orders and conducts her own investigation to find the children. That is quite honestly all I could say about this movie's plot without spoiling much of the enjoyment. So for this video, I'm going to tell you my thoughts as best I can without spoilers, and then we're going to do a whole spoiler section at the end of the video. So, Zach Cregger, formerly a member of The Whitest Kids You Know, a sketch comedy group from the early 2000s, one that I loved watching as a kid, burst onto the horror scene in 2022 with his film Barbarian, a film that definitely took a lot of people by surprise in its effectiveness at pulling a bait and switch. You think the film is one thing until it becomes pretty obvious that it's another entirely. And Weapons, I would say, follows in Barbarian's footsteps. The setup is unsettling enough as it is. The mystery is compelling as it is. It really leaves the door wide open for your mind to go connecting dots, to try to be one step ahead of the story, to try to guess what's going to happen next. But rarely did I find myself getting it right, except for one instance, which I'll cover in the spoiler section. And God, it's so hard to do a spoiler-free version for this movie. Let me just say, this film is so effectively creepy as hell while simultaneously oscillating its tone wildly and effectively. The peaks and valleys of my heart rate were pretty consistent, and I know that that's a common thing for horror films, to give you some breathing room after a few scares, but it's the constant sense of unease that is so well done here. The performances are all top-notch. I have nothing but praise to give everyone in this. I especially love seeing Alden Ehrenrich showing up in more things. I think he might have felt a little bit tainted after playing young Han Solo, but frankly, I've loved him in everything that I've seen him in. Julia Garner and Brolin are wonderful as well. Brolin delivers one of the funniest lines of the entire movie. And I also want to give a shout out to Austin Abrams and Benedict Wong and another actress in this movie who I'm not going to name for potential spoiler purposes, but if you know, you know, and she's great. The score for this movie was chilling in this droning, thumping, and scratchy way that to horror enthusiasts might seem par for the course, but I just found extra effective. And the scares are there in this movie. That's kind of why we're all going to see it. But like I said, it's more about the consistent tone and unpredictability that I personally latched onto the most. There are a lot of comparisons one could make with this movie. The most gracious I think that I could give is that if you had told me that this was adapted from a Stephen King novella or something he just coughed up onto a wall, I'd have believed you, no question. There is at least one homage to The Shining in here that I could catch. Also, you get a small town, suburban setting where bad things happen to kids. I mean, you can't not think of Stephen King. Another comp I could give would be Denis Villeneuve's Prisoners, specifically in the way this film is shot and edited. It has this very pristine quality about it, but this dark look to it that features this small town texture. And there's also an eeriness similar to Peter Weir's Picnic at Hanging Rock. And another comp I would give, which I guess is a subtle spoiler, but it's something that Zach Cregger has mentioned a ton in the press and lead up to this film, is Paul Thomas Anderson's Magnolia. I apologize if this comes across as a spoiler. I don't really think it is one. I'm just going to say it anyway. One aspect of the film that I haven't mentioned yet is that it's told in a non-linear fashion and is presented in a way in which we switch perspectives from character to character. So we may see the same event twice, but from the perspective of another character the second time around. So like we open the film on Justine, Julia Garner's character's perspective, and suddenly we switch to Josh Brolin, whose child has gone missing. He and Julia Garner intersect briefly, and suddenly something crazy happens. Cut to black. Now it's Alden Ehrenreich's turn. Hopefully, I think you get the idea. And the meticulousness of this aspect is what I have to commend the most. It feels pretty calculated in such a fun way, and also never allows the audience to feel lost on the through line of the plot. So, because we essentially get an ensemble film where we are seeing the same events from multiple vantage points, it allows for multiple storylines to breathe their own life before intersecting with the plot proper. Cregger even said it himself that Magnolia is able to paint with so many different colors while maintaining a controlled palette, and I would have to say that I would throw the same praises at Weapons. The final thing I'll say before jumping into total spoilers is that I often find that it's rare for me to see an ending of a film and say, of course it had to end that way, but I somehow didn't see it coming, with a giant grin on my face. I'm obviously not going to say what happens, but when it does, my theater went ballistic, I went ballistic, and I thought to myself, oh, right, there was only one way this ends in a satisfying manner, and there it is right in front of me. It does that while, again, playing with its tone so effectively in a way that could be quite jarring, but I don't know, it leaves you on such a high that you don't really care that it's such a leap in emotion. And I know I just said I was going to go to spoilers, but before I do that, there's a couple more things I actually want to talk about, so stick around. In terms of negatives for this film, I don't really have many other than maybe that the film doesn't necessarily deliver on a promise that it makes in the beginning. And maybe this is a marketing problem, maybe it's a budget problem more than a movie problem. But there's this certain sense that the film gives you that it's going to go off the rails, especially with one thing that the narrator, a young girl at the school, says in the beginning of the film. But in that department, I would say that the film kind of stays firmly on the rails. It's a little rocky, I guess, and you don't know where the rails are headed to, but you stay on them. And also, while we're talking negatives, I say this about a lot of films of this nature, meaning films that hop from perspective to perspective. For instance, the recent film Life of Chuck. I sometimes buck against them because you just sort of inherently lose that safety net, that thing to latch onto emotionally or otherwise. We do leave Julia Garner and Josh Brolin for what feels like a significant chunk of the movie, to the point that when they do re-enter the story, I was like, oh yeah, these guys are back. And honestly, while we're on the topic of negatives, I'm not so certain how much I even love the actual explanation of the disappearance. Okay, that might be just a good time to transition into spoilers, so stop here if you don't want the film spoiled and go check out Weapons, because it honestly is a pretty delightful, twisted time. So with them gone, let me just address what I was just talking about. As soon as I saw the word witch painted in red paint on the side of Justine's car, I was immediately like, witchcraft is going to be involved. It just has to be. It was this sort of Chekhov's gun that when I saw it, I was like, oh man, well, okay. I don't really know how to explain it, but I guess just the idea of witchcraft being the explanation didn't fully vibe with me. And beyond that, the film doesn't really go out of its way to explain Gladys, the witch controlling everything, at all. We're led to believe that she's Alex's biological aunt or the aunt of his mother, that she does this witchcraft stuff, but I guess I never really got her motives. Even at the end, she mentions that having the children will cure her ailment, but like, how? And does she get better? How does having the kids do that? I assume her end goal is to be nursed back to health, but again, how? Does it have to be children? Like if there was a shot of the movie where there's a cauldron and she was chucking the kids into them, I'd be like, oh, okay, it's some witchy, gotta eat the kids to stay young shit. But from what I could see, the kids all remain pretty uneaten down in the basement. And just to clarify what I said earlier about the film staying on the rails, there's a line in the beginning where the narrator says, a lot of people die in really weird ways in this story. And like, by my count, there are 5 deaths in this movie. Not a lot by movie standards. One of them gets his head bashed in by his possessed spouse. One gets hit by a car. 2 get shot in the head. And 1 gets ripped apart by ravenous children. So, like, 2 of those are really weird. And sure, the possession aspect is really weird, but that's not how they died, and also how much of that is widely known to the public. But anyway, I guess that's just what I mean when I say that I was expecting some really off-the-wall shit to happen, some off-the-wall deaths. I was expecting this to be like a town-wide phenomenon, maybe a Running Man situation where the entire police force is being weaponized against Julia Garner and Josh Brolin. Or something like The Happening, where Gladys forces people to take their own lives. I guess what I'm saying is that the film remains pretty localized to the 6 or 7 characters that we spend time with, and that's fine, but it felt a teensy bit anticlimactic, or like the stakes don't ramp up in a meaningful way by the 3rd act. Or to put it another way, it felt like the momentum kind of comes gliding quickly to a halt once we transition into Alex's perspective. And just to wrap up my negatives before I praise this film again, I guess I was left feeling like the film had set up some pretty unique themes up front that never seemed to be followed through on. Admittedly, they might be heavy, more socially conscious themes for a filmmaker who might just want to make something spooky, not something that absolutely needs to have substance. But I'm talking about themes of weaponization of grief, tribalism, otherism, weaponization of children, mixed with conspiracy, and things of that nature. It kind of just goes into my wish that the film felt a bit grander in scale. I expected after the PTA meeting scene in the beginning, there would be more town-wide events to unpack. And I think maybe what I'm grappling with is thinking that I want every horror film to come loaded with subtle social commentary, but also not wanting filmmakers to feel burdened into injecting it willy-nilly. If you see this film as an allegory for school shootings, then that's great for you. If you have some other intellectual read on the film, that's great for you. I just kind of saw it as an eerie, suburban, witchy ensemble horror flick. But please share your intellectual readings of the film down in the comments because I genuinely am curious. And honestly, I know I've been giving these grievances a lot of airtime in this video, but to me, they're minor in the grand scheme of the film. What this film does right far outweighs those gripes, in my opinion. In particular, the tone and the way that Cregger, a known funny man, is able to oscillate between pure supernatural horror, occult horror, social horror, and then laugh out loud moments that lead to one of the most satisfying endings in recent memory is pretty astounding. I know some people will disagree. I can already predict the folks who complain that it leaps too heavily into the comedy. But honestly, I found it refreshing. And, there's this old screenwriting lesson about leaving a lasting image in the minds of the audience. And that chase sequence is pretty memorable, especially with how it ends. And, one thing I'm always conscious of when I'm making these is that these videos can really get bogged down into, hey, remember this scene? Wasn't that awesome? So I'm going to try not to do that. But one that I have to point out is the scene where Justine is staking out Alex's house. And it cuts to nighttime and she's asleep And then out of the house comes a possessed Alex's mom with a set of scissors, and she walks up creepily to the window, gazes at Justine for a few seconds, pauses, and then she exits frame. And for a few seconds, there's like this, what the f? Where did she go? And then just the sound of one of the car doors opening made my theater collectively squirm in their seats and go, oh, no, 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 no. That's really the kind of effective horror staging that we just love to see. And on top of that, I love when a film can inject a bit of new horror iconography into the genre. Both Gladys as a character, the design of her makeup and outfits, and the way that people become weaponized as these unstoppable primal beings with one task to barrel toward their target, they're pretty visually stunning things. Recently, I've been rewatching the films of the Coen brothers, and there appears to be so much ease with which they're able to craft cinema icons that could be remembered just from like a silhouette alone. You've got like the hat from Miller's Crossing, or Barton Fink's haircut, or the dude. Just in general, they're so good at it. And this film, I think and hope, has the potential to break into the mainstream and become one of those new horror icons. Like I said at the beginning, Zach Cregger really seems like he has what it takes to be notarized as a filmmaker to watch in the genre, similar to Ari Aster, Jordan Peele, Robert Eggers. He has already showcased an ability to inject authorship into his films. The two so far share so much DNA, even leaving aside the whole don't go into the basement element. I can probably predict that he's not going to lean into the whole cut to black right as some up happens thing in the future with his next movie, a Resident Evil adaptation, but it was implemented pretty nicely here as well as Barbarian. And I just briefly want to mention again how textured and lived in this movie feels. The town of Maybrook feels kind of nostalgic for me. It feels reminiscent of a town that I grew up in a way that didn't feel dolled up in some glossy Hollywood polish. And the character of James, the heroin addict played by Austin Abrams, was simultaneously the most entertaining and funny character and the most tragic and most realistic. I certainly have met that guy in real life. I keep replaying moments of this film that feel so viscerally uncomfortable in ways that aren't even related to the supernatural witchcraft stuff. Like when Paul searches James's pocket and gets stuck with a needle, and then out of pure rage, he just punches James in the face. That was a whole sequence that could have easily felt like a waste of time, but it all converges so mathematically in a way that is satisfying and tragic to see unfold. The small bits of texturization really go a long way and do something subconsciously for the benefit of the film. Even the fact that Paul is dating or married to a woman named Donna, and he cheats on her with Justine, an old flame, and Donna attacks Justine in the liquor store, all of that didn't feel necessary to the plot and could leave you scratching your head thinking, how does any of this relate to the mystery of the missing kids? But all of their actions in one way or another lead them down the path of getting to that house on the same day. It's all just fascinating stuff and essentially just helps to aid in a very fun and scary film. And those are essentially my thoughts. I highly recommend this film. It keeps you guessing all the way through, and as someone who has had an allergy to horror films in the past, it has been a great year for them, with Sinners 28 years later, Together, and this all being good to great additions into the horror canon. But what did you guys think? Head down to the comments and let me know what you thought of Zach Cregger's Weapons. Is it one of the best films of the year? Is it a bit of a dud? Do you think that it loses steam in the third act? I kind of think it does, but that ending, I'm going to be thinking about that ending for a long time. So let me know down in the comments. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, hit the bell to be notified when new videos come out on the channel, and I'll see you all next time.